The Alpha King woke with a mate mark he never received. I woke before dawn to pain. Not the dull ache of old sparring wounds or the familiar press of cold stone through the furs, something sharper than that. Something deep, like a coal pressed to the inside of my wrist bone, burning outward through the skin. I sat up in the dark and held my arm toward the narrow window where the first gray of morning was beginning to thin the black, and I stared at what was on my wrist. A mark, silver and gold both, woven together the way two rivers meet and cannot be told apart again, the mate mark, unmistakable to any alpha who had seen one. I had seen my father's. I had seen it on the wrists of 100 bonded wolves in my court over 30 years of rule. I knew it the way I knew my own name. I had not stood at any ceremony. I had not touched any woman's hand. I had held no moon rite in 3 years, not since I disbanded the last one when my wolf refused every candidate my council brought forward and sat down in the center of the ceremony floor with his great silver head lowered, shaking once, refusing. My counsel had been furious. I had not cared. And yet here it was, here it burned. I pressed my thumb to the mark and felt it answer, a pulse, like a second heartbeat, steady and sure, reaching outward from my wrist as though searching for something it already knew the direction of. Inside me, my wolf was not still. He was not panicked either. He was awake fully, quietly, completely awake, in the way he became when something important was about to happen, not alarm. Certainty. I called for my steward before the sun had cleared the mountains. Aldrich came in pulling his robe closed, his gray hair loose at the shoulders, his face carrying the particular expression of a man who knew better than to be annoyed at a king, and was managing it poorly. He was 62 years old and had served my father before me and had earned the right to that expression, so I let him keep it. I held out my wrist. He stopped walking. He looked at the mark for a long time without speaking. In 30 years of knowing this man, I had seen him surprised perhaps 4 times. This was one of them. It appeared in the night, he said. I woke to it. A few hours before dawn. Without a ceremony. Without a ceremony. He pulled a chair to the edge of my bed and sat in it, which he never did without being invited, and studied the mark more closely. The silver-gold threads of it were still faintly luminous in the early light. They would settle to a softer glow once the bond was fully seated. My father had told me, but in these first hours they burned bright enough to read by. There is someone in the hold, Aldrich said slowly, or someone near it. The mark does not form without proximity, that much is documented. I know what the mark requires. Then she is here, my king, within range. Within these walls or close to them. My wolf stirred, and for the first time in I could not count how many years, the stirring was not restless. It was not the low, frustrated circling he had done through every moon rite. Through every arranged presentation my council had staged in the 3 years since I disbanded the formal ceremony. It was something quieter than that, and something larger. Recognition without surprise, as though he had known all along and was merely waiting for me to catch up. Tell me who arrived in the last 3 days, I said. Aldrich straightened. The usual courier from Greenfall brought Eastern dispatches 2 days ago and returned the same night. A party of 3 merchants from the lowland road asked shelter from the storm and were given the outer guest rooms, 2 men and a woman, salt traders. All 3 left at first light yesterday. He paused. And the record mender from Coldfen arrived on foot 2 evenings ago. I looked at him. The census records, he said, and his voice had a faint quality I could not immediately name, not guilt, not quite dismissal, something in between. The border settlements file their population counts every 5 years. Coldfen is 3 days' ride east. They sent someone to deliver the ledgers in person. There was apparently a discrepancy in the previous filing and they wanted it corrected by hand. He cleared his throat. I put her in the lower records room. She came with the official correspondence from her settlement elder, but she had no pack name, no formal standing. I saw no reason to disturb your household with the placement. The lower records room, I repeated. She arrived at the gate in the evening. The gate wardens nearly turned her away. The mark on the correspondence was genuine enough, but she arrived on foot and carried the ledgers herself. She had no escort. Aldrich's tone remained careful, but I could hear the shape of what he was not saying. That a woman arriving alone from a border village with no title and no pack name and ledgers strapped to her back had not seemed like anyone who warranted attention. My wolf pulsed once hard against the inside of my chest. Where is the lower records room? I said. The east wing, ground level near the archive vault. I was already standing. I did not take guards. Aldrich followed me, 2 paces behind as was his custom, and I could hear him working to keep up with my stride, but I did not slow. The east wing of Ashfeld Hold at dawn was cool and dim, the torches not yet relit, the narrow windows letting in a gray winter light that turned the stone walls the color of old bone. The archive vault was at the far end of a long corridor, and beside it, a smaller door. I stopped in front of it. My wolf went very still, not the stillness of refusal, not the lowered head shaking he had given every ceremony candidate in 3 years. The stillness of a creature who had arrived exactly where he was going. I knocked. Silence. Then the sound of quick movement inside. A chair shifted, something set down, and then longer silence, the kind that meant someone deciding. The morning record check, said Aldrich at my shoulder, improvising. For the archive. A pause, then the door opened. She was slight. That was the first thing, smaller than I had expected without knowing I had expected anything. Her brown hair pulled back in a practical braid, wearing a plain wool dress the color of heather in winter. She had ink on her right forefinger and her left thumb. Her eyes, when they came up to my face, were the gray of the sky before rain, and they widened, in the way eyes do when a person recognizes something they are not prepared for. She looked at my face first. Then, because she could not help it, her gaze dropped to my wrist. The mark blazed. Both of ours simultaneously, the way a struck flint catches her left wrist beneath her sleeve, which she had clearly wrapped in a strip of linen, the wrapping going incandescent with the silver-gold light of it, the cloth not thick enough to hold it back. My own wrist answered, and the warmth I had felt since waking became something larger in the space between us, not painful anymore, not burning but present, unmistakable pulling. She took 1 step backward. Her back met the wall of the small room. I did not, she started, and then stopped. Her voice was low and steady, which told me something. Whatever she was feeling, and she was feeling it, I could see that in her face, in the way her breath had gone shallow, she had decided on composure and she was holding it. I woke with it in the night. I did not seek it. I did not come here for, I am not here for that. I came to deliver the census ledgers. I am a record mender from Coldfen Settlement. I can show you the correspondence from my elder if there is any question. There is no question, I said. She looked at me carefully. May I see your wrist? I said. She considered that for a moment, genuinely considered it, which was not what most people did when the Alpha King of Ashfeld asked them something. Most people complied before the words were finished. She looked at me steadily with those gray eyes and decided, and then she unwound the linen wrapping herself slowly and held out her left wrist. The mark on her wrist matched mine exactly, silver and gold, the twin rivers of it, luminous even in the dim morning light of the records room. It was placed on the inner wrist as mine was, and it pulsed in the same rhythm. When her arm was extended toward me, the warmth between us intensified, and I watched the color come up faintly in her face even as she kept her expression composed. What is your name? I said. Wren, she said, from Coldfen. How long have you been in Ashfeld? Wren from Coldfen. 2 evenings, a pause. I had planned to leave this morning. The ledgers are corrected. I have the amended pages for the vault. You cannot leave. Something moved through her expression, not fear, not relief, something more complicated. I understand what the mark means, she said carefully. I am not ignorant of it, but I am a record keeper from a border settlement with no pack standing, and you are— She stopped. Her chin came up slightly. I am not sure you understand what you are looking at, my king. I think I understand it very well, I said. Your council will not. My council's opinions on the matter do not concern me greatly. She looked at me for a long moment. My wolf was completely silent, the silence of completion, not of waiting. He had been waiting, in one form or another, since I disbanded that last ceremony 3 years ago. He was not waiting anymore. The ledgers are stacked on the table, she said. The amended pages are bound separately, marked with the red cord. If you would send someone to the vault. The ledgers will keep, I said. Her mouth did something small and involuntary, a compression, as though she were holding something back that might have been wry under other circumstances. It was the first crack in her composure, and it undid me more than tears would have. Aldrich, I said, without looking away from her. My king, have the East Hall prepared, and send word to the senior council members that I will receive them at mid-morning. A pause. All of them, my king. All of them. I did not bring her to the hall immediately. There were practical things first, and I had enough sense to know that arriving before my council with a woman in a winter-worn wool dress and ink on her fingers, having just pulled her from the lower records room with no warning, was not how I intended to present this. I had 30 years of rule. I knew what moments required and what they did not. What surprised me was that she knew too. I put her in the care of my head housekeeper, an older woman named Bersa who had no politics and no agenda and an absolute talent for reading what was needed in a room. I told Bersa only that the woman was a guest of the hold and that she was to be treated accordingly. Bersa looked at my wrist, looked at the glow still coming through the linen on Rennes, said yes, my king, in a tone that managed to convey she had seen most things and this was not the strangest, and took Rennes in hand with the particular manner of a woman who is going to solve a problem. I went to my own chamber and stood at the window and looked out at Ashfeld in the early winter morning, the gray stone walls, the practice yard below just beginning to take the first pale light, the distant line of the eastern mountains where Coldfen settlement lay 3 days' ride away in the snow. And I thought about the mark on my wrist, and the woman who had arrived on foot with ledgers strapped to her back, and had told my steward she was a record mender. My wolf, for the first time in 3 years, lay down inside me and rested. I had not known how exhausted that restlessness had made me until it stopped. She came to my study before the mid-morning meeting, which I had not asked her to do. Bersa had found her something suitable, a dress of deep gray wool with a fur-edged collar, simple enough that it did not look like costuming, good enough that she looked like herself in it rather than borrowed. Her hair was still braided back the same way. The ink on her left thumb was still there. She had not been able to get it all out or had not tried. Your Bersa is very efficient, she said from the doorway. She is. I gestured to the chair across from my desk, and she sat in it, straight-backed, hands folded in her lap. I want you to know something, she said before I could speak. I am not asking anything of you. I know what the mark means. My grandmother was bonded and she told me the old stories. I know it is not something either of us chose. I know it cannot be falsified. She met my eyes levelly. I am also aware that a record keeper from a border settlement is not what your court expects. If there are arrangements that need to be made to manage this, I can hear them. I looked at her for a moment. What kind of arrangements did you have in mind? I don't know. I thought perhaps you might. She paused. You have a council. They will have opinions. They usually do, I agreed. Do they override you? No. She nodded once slowly. Then I suppose my question is what you want to do about it. I leaned back in my chair. Outside the window the winter sky had lightened to white, the kind of flat northern winter light that makes everything look permanent and clear. I want to know about you, I said. Not about your settlement census records, about you. Something shifted in her expression, not softness exactly, more like the lifting of a held breath. "There is not a great deal to tell," she said. "My father kept records for Coldfen settlement populations, land boundaries, supply accounts. He taught me the work. He died 4 years ago. I have kept the records since." She paused. "I was told I had no wolf at 17. The settlement elder does the assessment. He listened for the inner presence and heard nothing, or said he heard nothing. I was reclassified as wolfless." She said it plainly, without emphasis, as though reading from one of her own ledgers. "You were told you had no wolf," I said. "Yes. And now?" She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was careful. "Since last night," she said, "there is something there. I do not know how to describe it. I have never had the words for it before." She looked at her marked wrist and then back at me. "Whatever it is, it was not there before I came to Ashfeld." My wolf stirred, warm and certain. I understood, suddenly and completely, what had happened. The mate bond, forming not gradual, not ceremonial, but the way the old stories described it, the way my grandmother had described it, the way it had supposedly happened in the age before the moon rites were formalized. Two matched wolves, close enough in proximity, the bond forming of its own will in the night without any ritual at all. The ceremony was a human invention, an ordering of something that had never needed ordering. The bond itself was older than ceremonies. She had been in Ashfeld 2 nights. She had slept 70 yards from my chamber, separated by old stone walls and a long corridor, and the bond had formed between us in the dark as simply as breathing. "The settlement elder who told you that you were wolfless," I said. "He was wrong." She looked at me steadily. "Apparently," she said. "The council was 11 men and women, the senior wolves of Ashfeld Hold and the 3 territories it governed. They had served me well for most of my rule, and had tested my patience consistently for the last 3 years on the question of the mate bond and the succession and the moon rites. I had held them off. My wolf had held them off, by refusing every candidate they brought and making the ceremony a mockery, until I disbanded it entirely. They were assembled in the East Hall when I entered, and they were looking at my wrist before I reached my chair. I sat. I did not cover the mark. Aldrich stood at the side of the room. He had the particular expression of a man who has chosen a side and knows it. "My king," said the first counselor, Osric, 60 years old, careful in all things, the longest-serving member of my council, and the one most likely to choose the diplomatic path first. "The mark on your wrist." "Yes," I said. "Without a ceremony." "Without a ceremony." A silence. The 11 of them looked at each other with the complicated rapidness of people who had spent years in council together, and had developed the ability to hold an entire conversation in the space of a glance. "She is the woman from Coldfen settlement," said Osric. Not a question. Aldrich, I suspected, had told him something already. "A record keeper, no pack name." "No formal pack standing," I said. "Coldfen is a border settlement, not a pack territory. Their wolves function as a community, not under pack law. She was assessed at 17 and told she was wolfless. By the settlement elder." "Who was wrong?" Another silence. One of the junior council members, a young woman named Vesta who had joined the council 2 years ago from the Eastern Territories, and who had been the most persistent advocate for resuming the moon rites, was looking at my wrist with an expression I could not read. "The bond is real," said Osric. He was not arguing. He was a careful man, and he was reading the room specifically. He was reading me. "The bond is real," I confirmed. "And the woman, Wren from Coldfen, she carries the matching mark." "She does." Osric was quiet for a moment. He pressed his fingertips together on the table. He was, I knew, processing the end of 3 years of one particular argument. "Then there is nothing for the council to determine," he said slowly. "The bond determines itself." "Yes," I said, "it does." "The succession question." "Is answered," I said. or will be in time, but that is not today's question. He nodded once, the careful nod of a man absorbing a shift in the map he had been using and beginning to redraw it. The others followed his lead, not unanimously, not without discomfort visible on 2 or 3 faces, but without open challenge. There was nothing to challenge. The mark on my wrist was the oldest law of our world, older than the council, older than Ashfeld's stone walls, older than the ceremony my ancestors had invented to manage it. You did not argue with it. Even my most politically minded counselors knew that. I had expected the steward question to come next, whether she would be presented publicly, whether the announcement needed to be made formally, whether the matters of standing and settlement origin needed to be navigated through the pack registry. All reasonable questions, all questions I was prepared for. What I had not entirely prepared for was Vesta. The young Eastern counselor set her hands flat on the table. She came to our gate on foot, she said. Aldrich, forgive me, your wardens nearly turned her away. Aldrich, from the side of the room, had the grace to look uncomfortable. The gate wardens followed procedure, he said carefully. The correspondence was verified. But the presentation was. She had no escort, said Vesta. She carried the ledgers herself. She was put in the lower records room. She looked around the table. The Alpha King's fated mate was put in the lower records room. The hall was very quiet. That is a fair observation, I said. Aldrich's expression had passed through uncomfortable and arrived somewhere closer to genuinely pained. He was not a cruel man, and he had not been deliberately dismissive. He had simply seen what the situation appeared to be on its surface and had acted accordingly, with no way of knowing what lay beneath it. That was, I thought, precisely the point. She had arrived as a record-keeper from a settlement no one considered significant, and she had been treated as one, and the mark on my wrist had formed anyway in the small hours of the night, indifferent to the steward's assessment. The bond did not wait for permission. It did not care about pack standing or corridor assignments or the opinions of gate wardens. It had decided, and it had told me, and now I had the pleasant work of making the rest of the world catch up. Call her in, I said to Aldrich. She came in the way she had come to my study, straight-backed, unhurried, her hands quiet at her sides. She looked at the assembled council without flinching, which was more composure than most people managed in that room. 11 senior wolves of the most powerful pack hold in the Northern Territories, looking at her all at once, and her gray eyes moved across their faces with a steadiness I had not expected, and found I was watching with something that felt unfamiliarly like pride. She came to stand beside me. I stood as she reached me, which was not protocol, not the custom. The Alpha King did not stand for an incoming guest, and the council noticed. I saw Osric's expression shift, a careful recalibration of something in his assessment. I held out my wrist beside hers. The 2 marks blazed together in the winter light from the East Hall's high windows, silver gold, identical, pulsing in the same quiet rhythm. The warmth of the bond between us had settled since the morning into something less like fire and more like the deep warmth of a banked hearth. Constant, abiding, inexhaustible. The mate mark formed in the night without ceremony, I said to the council. Without a moonrite, without presentation, without any of the forms my council has spent 3 years urging me to fulfill. The bond formed because the bond formed, because she was here and I was here, and the old law does not require our permission. I looked at the 11 of them. I am telling you this not as a petition for your approval, which I do not require. I am telling you as a courtesy because you serve this hold and you deserve to know what your hold now has. I paused. Aluna. Wren, beside me, went very still. I glanced at her. Her expression had shifted, not undone, not cracked, but moved, the way a still surface moves when something passes beneath it. She was looking at the table, and then she looked up, and her eyes found mine, and she said nothing, which was more than enough. Osric rose first. He inclined his head toward her, not the full bow of ceremony that would come later, but a genuine inclination, a recognition. The others followed, some faster than others, all of them in the end. Vesta was the one who spoke. "Welcome to Ashfeld," she said, and her voice was warmer than council protocol required, and she did not appear to care. "I am sorry about the records room." A muscle at the corner of Wren's mouth moved, not quite a smile, close. "The room was dry and the table was large," she said. "The ledgers required space." A pause. "Though the morning light through that window is poor for close work, if someone could look at the eastern shutter." Vesta, despite herself, laughed. What followed in those first days was not simple. I want to be honest about that. A woman from a border settlement, no pack name, classified wolfless for 11 years, arriving on foot with census records. The hold had to absorb it. The gate wardens who had nearly turned her away were quietly reassigned to interior posts, not as punishment, but because the East Gate now required people with better judgment. 3 members of my outer court who made comments I heard about through Aldrich received formal corrections from me, delivered in private, in terms that left no ambiguity. The pack registry question was real. Coldfen was a border community, not a formal pack territory, which meant Wren had no pack affiliation to transfer. We resolved it the only way that made sense. She was registered directly under Ashfeld Hold, the first time in my father's memory or mine that the registration had been done that way, and Osric drafted the language for it with more care and specificity than he had devoted to most territorial treaties. There was also the matter of Coldfen settlement itself. Wren had kept their records for 4 years alone, since her father died. 3 days after the council meeting, she came to my study with the Coldfen census ledgers, and a quiet, practical argument that the discrepancy she had come to correct was not the only problem in the filing system, and that someone needed to go back to Coldfen to establish a proper record-keeping structure before the next 5-year count. She had a list. The list had 7 items. She had already drafted the letter to the settlement elder. I looked at the list. I looked at the letter. I looked at her, sitting across from me in my study in the gray winter light, her ink-stained thumb leaving a faint mark on the edge of the page. "You want to go back," I said. "I want the records to be correct," she said. "That is not the same thing." She met my eyes. "I am also not planning to disappear into a border settlement and leave you with an unexplained mark on your wrist. I know what the bond means. I am not running from it." "I didn't think you were." "I thought you might think I was." "No," I said, "I thought you were being thorough." She considered that. "I am thorough," she said, as though this were a simple fact about the world, which for her I was beginning to understand it was. We went to Coldfen together. A party of 6, which was as small a retinue as Aldrich would allow for a journey with the Alpha King, and Wren spent the 3 days riding with her ledgers in her saddlebag, going over the filing structure in her head, and occasionally asking me questions about pack registry law that had never been asked of me quite so directly or so practically. The settlement elder, when we arrived, looked at the mate mark on both our wrists and went a remarkable color. He was the man who had told a 17-year-old girl she had no wolf. I did not say anything about that. Wren did not say anything about that. But when the elder stood before us and offered a formal recognition of the settlement's bond to Ashfeld Hold, his voice was not entirely steady, and I thought he understood, without anyone telling him, the weight of what he had gotten wrong 11 years ago. The wolf in Wren, the one he had missed or dismissed or failed to hear, was not small. I had felt it through the bond by then, the way the bond lets you feel what is true about the person you are marked to. A steady, unhurried, enormous patience. The kind of strength that does not announce itself. The kind of wolf that sits very still and waits, for years if necessary, and does not mistake waiting for weakness. A settlement elder with a good ear would have heard it. The ceremony, when we held it at Ashfeld 3 weeks later, was unlike any moon rite I had attended or presided over. It was not elaborate. Wren had opinions about that, or rather, she had one opinion stated once, plainly, that a ceremony was for the bond, not for the court's comfort, and the bond already existed, and therefore the ceremony was mostly paperwork. She said this to Aldrich, who had been preparing to mobilize the full formal apparatus of an Ashfeld moon rite, and Aldrich had stood in the corridor outside my study, holding a list of 17 preparations, and very slowly lowered it. "She has a point," I told him. "She frequently has a point," he said. "It is going to be a characteristic." It was. The ceremony was held in the great hall with the full council, the senior wolves of the hold, and the Eastern Court in attendance. No additional dignitaries summoned, no elaborate delegation from distant territories. The hold itself. The people who lived and worked in Ashfeld's walls, from the council chambers to the lower kitchens, were all there. Wren had asked about that specifically, whether there was a reason the household staff were not typically present for a Luna ceremony, and when Aldrich said it was simply the custom, she had looked at the custom the way she looked at a ledger entry that did not add up and said, simply, "Then let's change it." So they were there, all of them. The kitchen staff along the left wall, the stable hands at the back, the archive clerks in a quiet row near the east door, including, I noticed, the young clerk who had let Wren into the records room 2 nights before and had clearly not known who he was letting in, and who now stood at attention with an expression of someone revising his understanding of several things at once. Wren stood beside me at the front of the hall, and I held both her hands, and we spoke the old words together, the words that had been spoken in Ashfeld for 6 generations before ceremony, the ones from the age when the bond needed no right to be real, only to be witnessed. Her voice was steady. When we raised our wrists together and the marks blazed gold in the hall's torchlight, a combined brightness that made several people shield their eyes, I heard the sound move through the assembled wolves. Not an exclamation, something quieter than that, the collective breath of a room that has seen something true. Osric, at the front of the council, inclined his head fully. Vesta, beside him, had an expression that had moved past professionalism entirely into something genuine. Even Aldrich, at the side of the room in his appointed place, had set down his list. The hold bowed, not commanded, not orchestrated, simply the natural motion of wolves who recognize what they are looking at. Wren beside me did not look at the room. She looked at me, and the expression on her face was the one I had first seen in the doorway of the records room, careful, steady, deciding, but with the deciding done, with the decision made and the weight of it settled. There is a moment in the weeks after a bond forms that no one prepares you for. My father had not mentioned it. The old stories did not describe it. It is the moment when the bond becomes ordinary, not lesser, not diminished, but woven into the fabric of the day, the way a river is woven into a valley. You stop being aware of it as something separate and begin simply living inside it. For me, it arrived one morning about 2 weeks after the ceremony. I was at my desk before dawn, as I always was, working through the Eastern Border correspondence, and Wren came in from the outer corridor still in her winter shawl, carrying 2 cups of something hot from the kitchen, and set one in front of me without a word, and went to the table by the east window where she had set up a secondary working space. She called it the annex, which Aldrich had adopted with more feeling than he generally showed, and opened her notebook, and the morning began. Nothing had happened, nothing momentous, nothing ceremonial. She had brought tea. I had kept working. The mark on my wrist had been warm, and the mark on her wrist had been warm, and across the room the scratch of her notation style, quick, economical, the hand of someone who had been writing in ledgers since childhood, was as familiar as the fire. I sat with that for a long time. Ordinary. The word had seemed, for most of my life, like a description of what a king did not have and should not want. The ceremonies, the council, the territorial disputes, the weight of governing a northern hold that controlled 1/3 of the pack lands. None of it was ordinary, and I had been trained from boyhood to understand that the distance between a king and ordinary life was not a loss but a requirement. But this morning, this woman, this quiet, was something I had not understood I was missing. Not luxury, not ease, just the simple weight of a life that had someone in it. I had been, I realized, enormously alone. Not in the way that produces complaint. I had a full court, a functioning council, a hold of several hundred wolves who depended on me and whom I knew by name. Alone in a deeper sense, in the sense of having no one to whom the days were reported, no one who was simply present in the room. Wren looked up from her notebook. "You have stopped writing," she said. "I'm thinking about the Eastern correspondence." "No." She waited, the way she waited, without pressure, without filling the silence, the patience of someone who had spent years in a records room with only ledgers for company and had made peace with quiet. "About how this became normal very quickly," I said. She considered that. "Is that a complaint?" "No," I said, "the opposite." She looked at me for a moment, the gray eyes, the particular quality of attention she brought to things she was deciding about. Then she nodded once and went back to her notebook. But the corner of her mouth had done the small thing I had learned to watch for, and that was enough. She kept the records. I want to say that clearly because there were people not in my council, but in the broader court, in letters from distant pack leaders who heard the news, who assumed that a Luna who had been a settlement record keeper would naturally set that work aside, that it was simply the life she had come from, and she would grow into something else now. They did not know Wren. The Ashfeld archive in the 5 years before she arrived had been a serviceable disorder. Functional, mostly, in the sense that things could be found if you already knew roughly where they were. She spent the first 3 months reorganizing it with the help of the archive clerks, who by the end of those 3 months would have followed her anywhere and often did, appearing in doorways at mealtimes to ask if she wanted them to cross-reference the Eastern territorial maps with the new settlement registry, and staying 3 hours past the dinner bell when she said yes. The filing system she built for Ashfeld Pack territories became, over the next several years, the standard that 4 other pack holds adopted. Osric told me this with the expression of a man who had entirely stopped being surprised by her and was simply documenting it now. "She has done more for the Eastern border settlement's record accuracy than my council has managed in a decade," he said, on a winter evening over the account ledgers. "I know," I said. "She is also better at the supply chain calculations than our quartermaster." "He knows," I said. "He asked her to take over the winter provisioning estimates. She said she would advise but not replace him, because he knew the suppliers personally and that knowledge was not in any ledger." Osric was quiet for a moment. "She is right about that too," he said. "She usually is," I said. "I find it useful." The mark on my wrist settled over those months into what my father had described. A warmth, constant and undemanding, like carrying a coal that never went cold. On difficult days, and ruling a northern pack hold produces them in reliable supply, I felt it as something steadying, a reminder of what the day was anchored to. On quiet evenings when the work was done and the hold had gone still, it was simply warm, simply there, simply her. She told me one evening what it felt like from her side. We were in the study, the fire low, the last of the day's account books closed. She had her feet tucked under her in the chair across from mine, a habit she had arrived with and kept, the chair having long since been reclassified in Bursat's mental map of the household as Wren's chair, and she had her left wrist in her lap, the mark visible in the firelight. "Like a compass," she said without prompting, "that is the closest I can get to it. Not pulling, not insisting, just showing me which direction is north." I looked at her. "I know that north is you," she said matter-of-factly. "I am not confused about that. I mean it as a description of the quality, not the content." She paused. It is quieter than I thought it would be from the old stories. Grandmother's stories made it sound overwhelming, consuming. It is overwhelming at first, I said. It was, she agreed. In the records room when you knocked. A pause. I was trying to decide whether to pretend I was not there. I looked at her with interest. You considered not opening the door. Briefly, she tilted her head. I was also aware that I was in a room belonging to you, so the pretense had an obvious ceiling. Her mouth moved in the small wry compression I had learned to watch for. I decided the honest approach was likely more efficient. It was, I said. It usually is, she said, and then, I am glad I opened the door. She did not say it dramatically. She said it the way she said everything important, plainly, without ornament, with the full weight of something that had been considered and meant. It landed the way those things do when someone does not waste them. So am I said. The fire settled in the hearth. Outside, Ashfeld's winter was doing what it always did, pressing down cold and clear, the kind of cold that makes the stars look close. The mark on my wrist was warm. Across the study, the mark on hers matched it, the faint silver gold of it visible even at this distance, even in the low light. My wolf lay quiet and rested. It had been 3 years of that restlessness, 3 years of refusing and circling, and shaking his head at ceremony floor after ceremony floor, 3 years of a frustration I had carried without entirely understanding it, because I did not know what he was holding out for. I knew now. He had known the way wolves know things, not through reason, not through ceremony or protocol or the careful management of pack law, but through something older and simpler and completely sure. That she was coming, that she was real, that she was worth the wait. He had been right. She always had the ledgers with her. That was one of the first things I had learned about her, and it remained true. There was almost always a small notebook somewhere on her person, or on the nearest flat surface if she had set it down. She had one on the table beside her chair that evening, and at some point in the quiet she had picked it up, not to write in it, just to have it in her hands the way some people have a stone they carry for comfort. I watched her turn it over once absently and set it back down. The Coldfin Settlement elder, I said eventually. She looked at me. You never said anything to him when we were there. No, she said. You could have. I know. She was quiet for a moment. What would I have said? That he was wrong. He knows he was wrong. The mark on my wrist tells him that without any words from me. She paused. And he did teach me the settlement boundaries when I was learning my father's work. He showed me the land survey maps. He was not wrong about everything. I looked at her. He was significantly wrong about one thing, she said. But I am not interested in keeping that particular ledger. This was, I thought, the most accurate thing anyone had ever said about the difference between the kind of record-keeping that served the world and the kind that only served the keeper. The night the mark had formed, the night I had woken before dawn to the burning in my wrist, in the room I had slept in alone for 30 years, in the hold that had been waiting in its own way for a Luna as long as my wolf had been waiting for a mate, I had not understood it yet. I had stood at the window and looked at the gray winter morning and felt the mark pulse, and not known whose it was, or where she was, or what she would be when I found her. 70 yards away, in a room with poor eastern morning light and a large table, she had been awake too. She had been looking at the mark on her wrist the same way I was looking at mine, turning it in the dim light, pressing her thumb to it, feeling it pulse back. She had wrapped it in linen and gone back to her ledgers. I had called for my steward before the sun cleared the mountains. We had found each other before mid-morning, the way things that belong to each other find their way, not through ceremony, not through protocol, not through any of the forms that had been insisted upon for 3 years, through proximity and patience and the oldest law of our world, which does not ask permission and does not require a right and does not, as it turned out, care at all whether the woman it selects arrives at your gate on foot with census records and no pack name. It knows what it knows. It has always known. I had just needed to wake up. The mark on my wrist was warm in the firelight of the study, and the woman across from me was reading her notebook now, her feet tucked under her ink-stained thumb leaving a ghost of a mark on the page's edge. And outside the hold Ashfield's winter pressed down bright and cold and full of stars, and my wolf was resting. And I was, at last, after 30 years of a kingdom and 3 years of a particular waiting I had not known how to name, entirely, steadily, irreversibly home.